world is in the midst of an epic battle that mainstream media don't even want to show you. Through all of this, try to remember that the point is that the rulers want to keep ruling. They want the workers to keep doing their jobs, but most of all, they want to maintain absolute control over the lives of the workers. Everything comes into focus if you remember that. I have a pair of articles for you this morning. The first is by Caitlin Johnstone. As U.S. eviction crisis looms, remember that poverty is weaponized by the elite. The other article is by Lauren Martinchek. The bloodiest is yet to come. In this piece, she shows you the inevitable conclusion to the story that mainstream media won't want to show you until the bitter end. CNBC News reports that Americans are looking at the possibility of up to 40 million evictions in the coming months as unemployment payments expire and a federal moratorium on evictions runs out. CNBC News, 40 million evictions, because neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have any intention of keeping those $600 a month unemployment payments coming. And today is the deadline. Today is the day the unemployment payments stop. So without the payments and without the moratorium on evictions, the shit is about to hit the fan. On Friday, the federal moratorium on evictions in properties with federally backed mortgages and for tenants who receive government-assisted housing expired, CNBC reports. The Urban Institute estimated that provision covered nearly 30% of the country's rental units. It's like nothing we've ever seen, National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel coordinator John Pollock told CNBC, adding that there were 2.3 million evictions in the entirety of 2016 and that there could be that many evictions in August. And then there's a graphic that shows the state-by-state impact of the eviction crisis. While ordinary Americans are worried about being evicted from their homes by the tens of millions, the nation's billionaires are warning the nation of the dangers of communism. After recently drawing fire for repeatedly cheerleading last year's vicious fascist coup of Bolivia's leftist government, billionaire Elon Musk is now tweeting anti-Marx memes and warning that leftists are losing the middle. I suppose we could take it as an encouraging sign that plutocrats are with increasing frequency feeling the need to go out and personally yell at the unwashed masses who are being slowly crushed to death by end-stage metastatic neoliberalism for their insufficient submissiveness to the capitalism god. They used to just have their PR people do it, so they must be at least a little nervous. This is America. This is what America is designed to be. The head of a vast, globe-spanning empire needs its rank-and-file citizens to be poor, powerless, busy, and brainwashed at all times, because a lot of power and money rides on keeping the riffraff away from the gears of the imperial machine. I have traveled through the US, the parts that everyone ignores and Hollywood doesn't show you, and I have traveled through many countries which are widely considered to be impoverished. It often surprises Americans when I say this, but the USA is largely a third world country blanketed in first world narrative. The way so many of them live compared to the bare minimum standard of living in other wealthy countries is absolutely breathtaking. And this is entirely by design. Elon Musk, Das Kapital in a nutshell. Give me that for free. Hungry Santa. This guy is a fucking asshole. Elon Musk, you are why guillotines were invented in the first place. On his Twitter feed, he mocks people. He says, you don't actually have a guillotine. This motherfucker needs to go. I talk about establishment narrative control a lot here, and it's important to remember that poverty in and of itself can also be a form of narrative control. If you keep a populace impoverished, toiling, and constantly terrified of the possibility of losing everything due to a single turn of bad luck or ill health, you ensure that they won't have the time and psychological spaciousness needed to sit down and examine, for example, why their elections never change anything or what their nation is doing to other nations. You also ensure that a critical mass of them will never be able to afford political influence. In a nation where you're literally incapable of influencing government policy and behavior unless you have a certain amount of wealth at your disposal, depriving the populace of their ability to pool their money toward electing a government which combats income and wealth inequality is the only way to go. The donor class are the only ones who get a say. In a nation where money equals power and power is relative, you necessarily get a ruling plutocratic class which needs to keep everyone else poor in order to maintain their rule. If everyone is king, then nobody is king. So if money makes you king in your society, then you necessarily have to actively deprive the majority of money. Ding, ding, ding. This is why I'm always dismissive of theories which insist that you can let the wealthy keep all their wealth and also provide enough for everybody. No, you can't. Because the wealthy have a vested interest in keeping everyone from having enough, and they use their wealth as a weapon to enact that agenda in the form of political influence, monopolistic tyranny, and mass media narrative control. You can't let them keep it. FDR made that mistake, and we've been paying for it ever since. You can't let the motherfuckers keep their power, their influence, their control. That means they can't keep their money. And people like Elon Musk know it. They know that their vast wealth is only possible if they keep their knees on the necks of the world's workers. They use their wealth as a weapon. They use poverty as a weapon. Caitlin Johnstone, what is the worst problem in America? Homeless people say economic injustice. Unemployed, underemployed people say economic injustice. The working poor, economic injustice. Uninsured people, economic injustice. Those soon facing eviction, economic injustice. Billionaires, communism. I think the billionaires see the writing on the wall. That's where McCarthyism came from. The rulers are trying to keep a hold on their power. That's why they made communism and socialism into dirty words. They don't want to lose their power. As long as human behavior remains driven by the pursuit of profit, we will continue to see steadily rising amounts of war, ecocide, oppression, exploitation, and mass-scale manipulation, because those things are profitable and or protect the interests of those reaping the profits. We will never, ever profit our way out of any of those problems. The market is not the solution. The pursuit of profit will only ever make more of these problems. The wealthy are only wealthy because they found some clever way to insert themselves as unnecessary middlemen between consumers and the labor, skill, and or talent which creates the actual thing the consumers are paying for, and skimmed most of the money off for themselves. That's all profit ever is in large-scale corporate operations. It's the money that parasitic middlemen were able to steal from the real talent and move into their own bank accounts. This will never create a healthy and harmonious world. It will only ever create more suffering and dysfunction. Something better is needed. The Bloodiest is Yet to Come by Lauren Martinchek. We're rapidly approaching the point where people have nothing left to lose and things are only going to get worse before they get better. For weeks, if not months, as a deadly pandemic took hold and left one of the greatest economic crises, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression, in its wake, I wondered what the catalyst would be for the American people to take their frustrations to the streets and demand the change necessary to ensure we're able to properly recover, heal, and move forward. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of Derek Chauvin of the Minneapolis Police Department was the spark I would argue the vast majority of us saw coming, prompting the largest global civil rights movement in history, and certainly extending well beyond the murder of one black man at the hands of one officer in one city. Admittedly, however, part of me is shocked at the idea that in such an apathetic and weary nation, there would be protests continuing all these weeks later in cities like Portland, Oregon. Not just in cities in the United States, we've got protests still in cities all around the world. You might try doing a search, a DuckDuckGo search on violent riots around the world, and you'll find a whole lot of them right now. When the protests first began and we saw images of Washington, D.C. on fire, a piece of me was wondering if this was truly the turning point and if a revolution had begun. Now, after watching the protests only grow significantly larger and more intense as unidentifiable federal officers took to the streets of Portland and began throwing protesters in the back of rented unmarked vans, I'm convinced that the revolution has begun. But as I consider everything that still lies ahead, I can't help feeling as though the conflict has still only just started. Just the other day, after handing out tens of billions of our taxpayer dollars to businesses and corporations of his choosing, after telling the American people we wouldn't be able to find out where all the money went to, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said explicitly on camera that in the midst of a pandemic that's left tens of millions of workers unemployed, we're not going to use taxpayer money to pay people more to stay home. Again, we have to stop and clear up a couple of things from the perspective of modern monetary theory. Taxpayer dollars are not dollars that come from taxpayers paying taxes. Dollars that are spent in the United States come from the Federal Reserve Bank. So the billions of dollars that went to bail out corporations and banks came from the Federal Reserve Bank. They were spent into existence at the request of Congress. Steve Mnuchin is only trying to make this less clear. We're not going to use taxpayer money to pay people to stay home. The taxpayer money is not what's being used to pay people to stay home. And he knows it. The same money that's used to wage illegitimate imperialistic wars on other countries is the money that's used to bail out big banks and corporations. And it's the same money that could be used to bail out the American workers. All right, back to the story. The American people are already in the streets protesting police brutality and the descent to fascism. At the end of the month, when those extra unemployment benefits expire and people like Steve Mnuchin continue to have the audacity to tell the American people, in an economy where an estimated 42% of lost jobs aren't expected to return, that they're just lazy, I don't think our lawmakers will have any idea what's coming. And the end of that month is today, people. None of this is going away anytime soon, and I can't shake the feeling that the bloodiest is yet to come. Wait until all the people dependent on that money to put food on the table for their kids and pay their rent or mortgage have to wonder what they're going to do next. Wait until the coming eviction crisis hits. Wait until the fall comes and this outbreak worsens. Wait until the American people realize they have absolutely nothing left to lose and they feel as though there's no way out. Forget civil unrest. It'll only get worse before it gets better, and the bloodiest is yet to come. Mark my words, these protests won't end if Joe Biden gets sworn in. For decades, class warfare has been waged against the poor, working, and middle classes, and it feels as though the American people are truly beginning to come to terms with its brutality. Understandable, considering it has only grown more cruel in the midst of one of our most vulnerable and difficult periods in recent history. 2020 has forced the eyes open, and for my generation in particular, they will not unsee. A generation that, it's worth noting, already feels as though any opportunity we had for a decent, livable, and sound future has been robbed from us. They have taken our wages and left us laden with debt. In stealing our wages, they've stolen our time, forcing us to devote more and more of it to the 2 or 3 jobs we need just to survive, instead of actually enjoying what little time we have here on Earth. They've taken our planet and its habitability, dooming us to a fate that will leave our children and our grandchildren with no home at all in the name of their own power, greed, and profit. In the midst of a global pandemic, they deny us health care, a safety net, and any ability to hang on to what last shred of stability we had left. This isn't something people are going to forget overnight. The anger's just setting in, frustration among the masses grows, and meanwhile the president is growing more and more desperate to hold on to power. The stage has been set, and the fight appears to be on. I'm not sure those in power bargained on the people putting up much of a fight when it came to the class war, but it looks as though that's exactly what they're getting. As the old saying from the Hunger Game goes, if we burn, you burn with us. This is the perfect opportunity to explain two key points. Caitlin Johnstone makes it abundantly clear that the rulers are using wealth to hold on to their power, and they're using our poverty to hold on to their power. Let me explain something about single-payer Medicare for all. If the United States workers have single-payer Medicare for all, it makes them much less vulnerable economically, obviously. So in the scenario where workers are less vulnerable and they get pissed off at their bosses, they have a lot more power to go out on strike and to stay out on strike. Right now, if you lose your job, you lose your medical coverage. So if you can keep your medical coverage, you can tell your boss where to shove it a lot more easily. The other key point is a federal jobs guarantee. If the federal government guarantees meaningful work that pays a living wage, then people like Jeff Bezos have a lot less leverage over their employees. I've got a federal jobs guarantee that lets me do work that is worth doing. It may be part of the green infrastructure. It may be building up our own communities individually. But I've got work that's worth doing for a living wage. Why am I going to work for some asshole like Jeff Bezos? And now you know why the rulers absolutely can't stand the idea of us getting single-payer Medicare for all or a federal jobs guarantee. That puts too much of the power into our hands. The problem with billionaires isn't their billions. The problem with billionaires is their power. They're using their power to keep the world's workers in misery, and that fucking needs to stop now. So if you see these protests, protesting racial injustice, and you think, yeah, this has fucking got to stop. The police got to stop kneeling on black men's necks. There are other forms of neck kneeling going on right now. Poor people have been getting shafted for the last 40 years. If we're going to fix this, we're not going to vote our way out of it. The only way we're going to fix this is if we get excited when we see the protests and we say, I think I could be a part of that. It is legal to protest in the United States. The First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees that right. And frankly, exercising that right is our only hope right now. So as the evictions turn up and the unemployment checks turn down, this is what we have to keep in our minds. If we burn, you burn with us.